The union government's recent announcement about Agnipath program has evoked a sharp reaction in some quarters in the country. I would urge everybody to lower the temperatures and go into issues systematically and rationally. Not politicize them, not polarize people, not make everything a life or death issue. The governments have a duty to take decisions on behalf of the people. That's why they are elected. As long as the decisions are constitutional and legal, we have to go by them. We have a right to criticize. We have a right to peacefully, non-obstructively protest. And of course, you have the parliament and state legislatures to address these issues, to debate them vigorously, and to find alternatives. But we cannot use the street to protest in an obstructive manner or indulge in violence or force the government to backtrack, because then constitution has failed. Decisions are not made on the street. They are made in the chambers of government or in the chambers of the legislatures, which are elected by us. That's what constitution is about. That's what democracy is about. Unfortunately, in our country, it has become fashionable for those in power to support every decision made by government, irrespective of merits, and for those in opposition to oppose every decision of the government, irrespective of merits. This kind of predictable reactions polarize society and damage public interest. We require honest public discourse. We require informed public discourse. And we require to rise above sectional interests or small vested interests or short-term problems. We must look at the long-term good for the largest number of people. You take the defense forces of India. We have about 15 lakh soldiers in India. There are another 10 lakh or so reserves. It's an old-fashioned notion to believe that the larger the army, the more powerful it is. By that standard, we must be one of the most powerful armies in the world, more powerful than America or Russia. America has only 4.8 lakh soldiers in all the four wings of its armed forces. But nobody can argue that America is less powerful than India. Modern armies have to be much more flexible, nimble, much more capable of moving swiftly, and must have tremendous technology in weaponry, communications, and signals. Modern army cannot be like old-fashioned infantry running its foot. It has to be based on technology. We are spending 5,25,000 crores every year on the defense forces. The current year's budget is about 5,25,000 crores. Most of the money is going for salaries and pensions, not for weaponry, technology, mobility, communications, and efficacy in waging a modern warfare. Let us see Ukraine. Russia is 30 times bigger than Ukraine in size, about 4 times the population. Its military budget is several times more than Ukraine's. It has sent 5 times more the armed forces than Ukraine has. And yet, Ukraine is able to counter Russia and contain Russia. Ultimately, Russia may prevail in some parts of Ukraine because Russia is too big and too powerful. And they are waging a brutal warfare through artillery, through massive incessant shelling. But Ukraine, the way Ukraine is able to handle, it shows us that modern warfare is not based on merely numbers. It's based on technology, training, communications, and quality of weaponry. Now, in order to do that, in order to progressively reduce the size of the armed forces but improve the efficacy so that more resources are deployed for the waging of the modern warfare, being ready for a warfare, and in order to give young people training and continue them in the armed forces if they are found to be effective after some time, the others will go back to civilian life with the skills. That is a sound proposal in principle. If there are some improvements required, we can certainly look at them. That's a professional issue of people who understand the issues in detail. It's not a street issue. The second problem is the notion that armed forces are for employment, or the notion that the government is for employment. It is a dangerously unhappy notion. And even the government of the day has propagated that notion. A few days ago, the Prime Minister announced with great fanfare that they're going to recruit 10 lakh employees in government to fill all the vacancies in the next 1.5 years. While we must make sure that the government has able people to fulfill the responsibilities to discharge their collective duties for the country. Government is not an employment agency. Government's primary objective is not to create employees and fund employees. Government's objective is to provide goods and services to people, to fulfill the collective needs that we as people individually or as small groups cannot fulfill. And therefore, rule of law, that means public order, justice, and rule of law. Basic infrastructure, basic amenities, quality school education with outcomes, with opportunity for everybody, good quality health care, and social security for those in distress. The government must deliver all these. And in order to deliver, you recruit employees. Employment recruitment is not the primary objective of the government. Employment is generated by economic activity, by our productive activity in society, by our buying, selling, utilization for the resources, for the services that we need. My need becomes somebody else's livelihood. If my need is not fulfilled by that livelihood, that employment is not sustainable. In India, somehow at the state level in particular, and increasingly now at the national level, we are viewing governments as employment agencies. Once you create that mode, if everything is viewed to the prism of how many people are employed by the government and for how long, rather than what has government accomplished with our money, has it fulfilled its objective well, has it served our collective needs well, we'll always be a very weak government, we'll always be a poor nation. And finally, there is a fundamental right to protest in a democracy peacefully. We don't have to agree with everything. Even two persons who are in the same family, who broadly agree with many things, may disagree on a particular issue. Two people agree identically only when one is a slave of the other. Therefore, difference of opinion is natural. It is healthy. It's necessary. But the issue is, how do you express the difference of opinion? How do you express protest? What are the forms of protest? Dr. Ambedkar, he clearly warned us at the time of the promulgation of the Constitution. He said, now that we have self-government, now that we have constitutional rights and fundamental freedoms, we cannot indulge in the old-fashioned forms of violent and disorderly and obstructive protest. When we were fighting a colonial government, when we had no rights, when we had no role in the government formation, when there was no self-governance, we sometimes indulge in violence, obstruction, our hartals, our bands, our violence from Chauri Chaura to 1942 Quit India movement violence. They were all products of desperation when you had no power and no voice and no rights. But once we have power, we have voice, we have rights, we cannot indulge in violent and obstructive forms of protest. They have to be civilized, peaceful, non-obstructive forms of protest. And the legislative chambers and the media, in a civilized and healthy and rational, persuasive manner, must undertake debates and discussions, not shouting brick matches, not abusing each other, and certainly not violence and obstruction of streets. Whether it's the farm bills or the Agnipath or something else, the government has a duty to enunciate policies, make laws, as long as constitutionally they're in office, as long as they command a majority in parliament, as long as the decisions are constitutional and legally valid, as long as they're not repugnant to fundamental human rights. We have to respect those decisions. If we disagree, we must debate them in parliament and in media in a civilized manner, in a rational manner. If we protest, we must peacefully, non-obstructively protest. In India, almost all these have become dysfunctional. The legislatures are emasculated. There is no healthy, serious, meaningful debate beyond party divide in legislatures. If a government does something, ruling party members are obligated to support it uncritically, wholeheartedly, 100%, without any discrimination. The opposition is obligated to oppose it uncritically, 100%, without any discrimination or wisdom. Therefore, the debates in parliament and legislature lost all meaning. It's a lawyer jirga. Parliament in India today has become a lawyer jirga of Afghanistan, where tribal council meets, there's no democracy, and each tribal council leader, depending on his own strength, is given the clout and they decide. Our parliament and legislatures have now become the party leaders' preserve. If X has so many members of parliament, thanks to the whip and the 10th schedule, there is no independent voice for members of parliament or state legislatures, and much of the debate has become meaningless. We have to restore majesty of parliament and legislatures. We have to restore the majesty of honest and intelligent discussion and reconciliation wherever feasible. And ultimately, a majority view prevailing constitutionally, if necessary, tested in a court of law if it's unconstitutional. Otherwise, I have to oblige and obey the rule of the law. I have to obey the decisions of the government as long as they're lawfully made. That decorum is necessary. And when I protest, I must protest peacefully, non-violently, non-obstructively. All these are given the go by. At the drop of a hat in every part of the country, we want to indulge in violence, in mayhem, in disruption of the infrastructure, the railroads, the traffic, and lives. That simply is not a democracy in operation. It becomes a mobocracy, it becomes anarchy. All parties are guilty of this because those in power now acted the same way when they were in opposition. Those in opposition now, when they were in power, they lamented on the same grounds. So it's not this party or that party. We have to listen to Ambedkar, get back to constitutional methods of protest, and meaningful debates and discussions in the legislatures, and sensible decision making, and constitutional order. Once a decision is made lawfully, that we all go by that until the next time comes. I hope that we will act with sanity. We will not create this country into a theater of violence and obstruction all the time and make governance impossible. There is room for discussion, debate, constant improvement, and ultimately decision making by us, the people of India, through our vote and through our responsible, peaceful, non-obstructive voice. Thank you.